of Earth deals with music and sound, just like we've been hearing from the native Hawaiians. And that to keep our traditions and our cultures, I've been asked to pull out the tuning fork set and to join with each of you in chanting the single name for each of the tones. Now, you know it's not do, re, mi, it's actually re, mi. And to just give you an idea, as I hit these and I put it into the microphone and you hear the frequency vibration and you lift your voices to chant the simple tone, the name of the note. Just for your information, we publish this in the Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse. Each of these 6 original musical notes, these are the core, again, creative frequencies of the Creator. These tones literally mean that there will be a time, and my prayer is that it is right here, right now, in this room, that on this holy Hawaiian land, that we lift our voices in praise to this incredible master creator of the universe, to inseminate the Aina, the land, and send out cosmically the that's required to fulfill what these tones actually mean. What they mean is that we are about to have a concert that's been prophesied by every culture, every prophet, and in the book of Revelation, a concert to the waters, ultimately, that will create the most amazing transformation in this planet's history. The first note is Ut, magnetic field strength. In the second note, Re is resonance, Fibris in Latin, resonance. It's a small periodic signal that has a profound impact, in that it's so much like the frequency of the mathematical matrix. The third note, Mi, mirror, gestorum in Latin, miracles in English. That's the miracle tone. Miraculous repairing of damaged DNA included. Fa, the family torum in Latin, family. The miracle family, which is what we are, brothers and sisters, miracle workers. And so that's the fourth note we'll be singing, praising the fact that we're miracle workers and a miracle family. The fifth note is sol, salve pollute in Latin, solve the pollution, solve the problem in English. And the last note is labiatum, the lips, the labia, labiatum, the core creative instruments of the universe, because if the Creator created through the spoken word on water, so what must we as powerful co-creators articulate the greatest blessings to bring this planet up for the planetary transformation and the recollection of how divinity can be expressed in peace and harmony on the planet. So with that, as an initial blessing, I'm going to play 396 hertz, which is the Ut, the initial unit of magnetic field strength to get it going. And just do whatever feels comfortable for you. So Ray is the next one. Pray for miracles with me, the miracle 6 tone. This is the love frequency, by the way. 528. Miracle fa. Fa. Whose mission is to solve the pollution, to solve the problem. So. And last but not least, the creative instruments, the lips. Thank you. With that, I'd like to just say a little prayer. I've been asked to pray for a sister of ours who is the wife of our beloved next speaker, Tom, whose wife has cancer. And, you know, I know that we're all extremely powerful. I know that connecting to the matrix as we do, and can routinely, that we have the capacity to envision and manifest miracles, given that we're the miracle family. So I'd like to ask you to pray sincerely with your total loving intent that we manifest a miracle in Jackie's body to oust, eliminate any bit of anything that is perfect. And that I'll lead also a little bit of a prayer, because we're now living in the times of the great plagues, and that as we're witnessing our own family and friends are being challenged, cancer, diabetes, all of these man-made plagues, it is us that we need to step forward and own and be responsible for this great challenge, and really administer the great healing through our own connections to the loving spirit that I know is possible. So with that, let us have a minute of prayer for Jackie's miraculous healing. Heavenly Creator, we ask you, we praise you in all the great names to bring you glory. We ask for a miraculous healing for our sister Jackie, who is dealing with an cancer that so many of our loved ones have either died from or are now suffering with. And we ask for a miracle manifestation, for the empowerment to deliver your love, your frequency vibration, your uplift, to have a full, complete, powerful anointing so that we can manifest our vision of purification in Jackie's body, that the cancer and the tumor and any negative cells that are not of you, nothing perfect, we want gone. In the blessed Messiah, Yeshua, and every other holy name that exists, we ask for a complete blessing in Jackie's body so that we now see her and we manifest that perfection in her of your greatness and your glory. Nothing missing, nothing broken in the kingdom of heaven. We ask that it manifests right now in Jackie's body, and that we see her uplifted in joy and in light and in peace and in harmony and and restoration with your sustenance and your vibration of love. We thank you for manifesting this, and we ask for a special anointing in every single one of us so that we carry on the great work of the world's greatest healers. That this is a time where we need to have a full anointing, a powerful flow of that healing energy, because there's so many of our friends and family, our loved ones, in need of that miraculous healing, and we want to be your miracle workers. So make us now. We actually decree and declare that we take ownership of this absolute wonderful blessing, this inheritance of your great power to administer healing to the nations, to the people, to our loved ones. We ask for each and every one of us in this room, leaders in the great transformation on planet Earth, fully and most powerfully anointed as your frontline warriors on the greatest healing blessing that this planet has ever seen in the transformational era, which is now. We praise you. We thank you for the uplift. And we again ask for a complete blessing and healing anointing on Tom and his lovely wife, Jackie. In Yasha's name, amen. What's that? She's reversed. You know, I know of no other person than the spouse who has the ability to reverse things the easiest, right? Reverse the reversals, right? It's all a matter of neurology, and Tom's expertise is in bioenergy. There you go. Perfect synchronicity, right? Thanks to every one of you.
So while Tom's setting up, maybe I can just share a few words about the conference and about what this point in the conference means for us. Many have devoted their energies, commitment to making this conference a success. We saw an instance of that just a little while ago with Kumu and his singers and his dancers that gifted us with that performance, gave us from their heart this beautiful gift of their dancing, the ceremony and the significance of that, and really bringing to us this aloha spirit. And this is really what Hawaii is about, bringing that spirit of aloha, that welcome, that gifting of energies, of being in gratitude for life. And I think we have much to be grateful for from this conference, because we really have brought a wonderful assortment of speakers with incredible subjects and topics that inspire them, that move their hearts, and they're committed to that. And we've seen that so far, and we're going to be seeing more of that tonight and tomorrow. And of course, you gift us with your presence, because all of you have come from, in some cases, Japan, Russia, Australia. You've travelled great distances to come here from the east coast of the United States, Canada. And so we're very blessed to have you here, because you show the commitment to come and see the potential in this gathering. Because as you know, transforming really begins with that core group of people. Margaret Mead summed it up so well when she said, only small groups of committed individuals change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. She recognised that it really begins with small groups of committed people like tonight. And tonight, everyone here has that commitment. Everyone here has that passion to change the world, to be an instrument in the transformation that lies ahead. And it really is my great honour to introduce someone who's lived that for some decades now, who has been a pioneer in bringing to us, bringing to humanity, a vision of how the world can be in terms of new ways of thinking about the energies that we rely on to maintain our basic appliances, to our transportation, to He's been looking at these alternatives. He's been someone who's worked in the field as a professional engineer. He's worked in universities teaching college students these pioneering technologies. He's been teaching this to the general public, to audiences, and he has been able to produce that rare ability of being able to simplify very complex ideas into easy digestible concepts for people. And that's what we're going to be seeing tonight. ThomasValone is someone that works with the very basics of how these new technologies work. He's not a theorist in a university developing ideas. He's worked in the US Patents Office, so he's seen how these technologies are actually developed and applied. He's been at the forefront of understanding the feasibility of these and supporting new energy inventors. He's been doing that for some time and has paid a price for doing that. He's had problems with the US Patents Office in terms of his position there, but he's persevered and come through, and is really a shining example of just how someone committed to a vision can really make a difference. And tonight we're going to see him give us some idea of these new energy technologies that exist out there, and we'll apply it to UFO propulsion systems. So he will bridge the many interests that have been expressed in this forum, in this gathering. So with that, I'd like to thank Tom for coming here. So I welcome Dr. ThomasValone.
Thank you very much. I've got the mic here, I think. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I have a great show for you to entertain you and also hopefully keep your attention as well. And without any further ado, let us get started. The topic is future energy technologies, and I thought I'd add the UFO propulsion concepts and delivery that I've done in a couple other arenas, National Space Society and UFO Congress and so forth. So I think you'll enjoy it. First of all, I'd like to present you with the front page of the Washington Post, back in my hometown, by the way. This to me was a great breakthrough. Of course, it's almost 10 years old, but it still is not only emphasizing the topic that I'll be presenting to you right now, but also the fact that the gravitation and inertial effects were something that were being emphasized here in the article in the Washington Post. So the study of UFO-related phenomena. And this is exactly some of the interests that I have, also some of the technology that you can learn about as you start to investigate this field. But let's get a perspective first. Where are we? Well, we're not at the center of our galaxy. And if any of you guys know about our galaxy, this is the older part. Millions of years older. Do you think the civilizations, if there are any, in that center part might have a little advantage over us? Evolutionary-wise? Maybe so. Our edge, the spiral arms are the retarded parts. The ones, the younger parts of the neighborhood that are just growing up. They can't quite get off their planet yet, you know. And of course, do you think our night lights are telling them anything as they cruise by? Maybe so. So the question we have to ask, since we're stuck on this planet, is how can we visit Mars? I mean, that's probably the most important planet we should strive for. Well, I would propose certainly not by carrying fuel. And the reasons for that are threefold. First of all, in 1986, the National Aerospace Plane Project was to take off like an airplane and burning semi-frozen slush hydrogen. By 1992, it was clear the scramjet idea was ahead of its time. Nobody knew whether the engine could work, and it was canceled in 1993. And then Delta Clipper, I don't know if you've ever seen the video of the Delta Clipper in the center here. It was an unfortunate boondoggle. McDonnell Douglas started off in the 1980s with it, and it was a Star Wars concept and so forth. Low speed, supposed to land safely, and then it toppled over and destroyed itself in 1996. And then the worst thing was Lockheed Martin thought, oh, well, we'll just create a real thin skin and put fuel in it, and then it'll fly. and you can re-land it as well. And it was called a lifting body vehicle, took off vertically. But the challenge was, as the article says, to make the vehicle light enough to carry a payload in addition to all the fuel. And the tanks of liquid hydrogen proved too hard to build, and it was canceled in 2000. So this does not look too promising. And on Earth, we're having the same type of problem. Anybody burning fuel these days? Oil tend to be, we're going over the roller coaster peak right now, and we're headed down. And the peak essentially is something that you can debate, which the experts have, but it's amazing, and the articles you read about it, all of them show within a 5 or 10 year period of estimation. So what's going to happen as it goes down? Well, we're pretending the business as usual, supplying all our needs, but there's an impending oil crisis that's basically seeing. And it will bite us sooner than we're expecting it. So do you think in 2002 that we started preparing for it now? Well, you can answer that question yourself. But at least I tried on CNN to tell the world. And this section here I wanted to share with you, since we're talking about the Earth a little bit and we're at an Earth Transformation Conference. This is the graph that Al Gore tries to explain in his movie, Truth, but sort of orchestrates a nice little elevator ride up to the peak here where 377 parts per million is. But to tell you the truth, and I could just ask the audience, how many people know what 377 parts per million means? Anybody? Hey, there's one. Okay, that's good. I mean, at least we got one. But in general, the correlation between all three of these graphs, all three of these lines, is the most imposing conclusion that you end up getting from this. And what you're looking at is a composite, and I spent hours in this graph. I put together 2 pages worth of graphs, put them together to give you the best of the beginning and the end. And it was just into Technology Review last year. And the most important part about it is graph proves that carbon dioxide, Earth temperature, and sea level are intricately correlated and have been so for 400,000 years on the Earth. Every time one goes down, the others go down. Every time one goes up, the other goes up. It doesn't matter which goes up first, the other two will follow. And it's been going up and down within the range of 300 parts per million of carbon dioxide. And what's good about this graph is it's also calibrated in temperature and also in sea level. Now the conclusion you get, and these are on the side here, these are actual lines with the key that's right at the top here, 200 parts per million, 10 parts per million, half a degree meters for every line. The conclusion is the 7-degree part. That's the first shocker that comes out of this 377. 7 degrees average increase is the destiny that we're already locked into. If this stays where it is or it goes up, this is going to be a very difficult place to live. And that's exactly what I said last time I presented this. No, they reported in centigrade, 4 degrees centigrade, just so you won't be afraid, so scared about it. No, 7 degrees is Fahrenheit. And if you can imagine 1 or 2 degrees, that's what the experts are telling the public. But the 7 degrees is the truth. It doesn't matter if you're talking 50 years or 100 years, it's still going to happen within about a century or less. And what I feel also as far as Hawaii and other places, the 80 meters was to me the most shocking part as well. Because 80 meters sea level is something no one has been told either. And you know, it's funny, before I came to this conference, I just read an article in Technology Review again, and they were describing the water that's in Antarctic. It's the glacier in Antarctic that's land-based. If that melts, that's 65-meter sea level rise. Greenland adds another 7 meters. We've already got enough landlocked ice to give us that sea level rise. So the facts, and now the question is, can we do something about it? And the exciting thing is, at our conference where this graph was presented, we also came up with a speaker that had a solution, and I'll share it with you in a second. But first of all, since some of you people like conspiracy theories, I wanted to show you this memo. This was on ABC News, and this was also displayed in Al Gore's movie, Inconvenient Truth. And this is an American petroleum altitude memo, victory will be achieved when average citizens realize uncertainties in climate change. And that was about 10 years ago, and basically they succeeded. This is how Washington, D.C. works. That's where API is located. The obfuscation is a directive that the organization decides upon and says, hey, we'll get favorable results if we feed the media with lots of bogus stuff. And as Al Gore points out in his movie, yeah, the media was so convinced that they said 50% the experts say, you know, there isn't any global warming. And yet the scientists were saying, where are you getting the information from? Well, now we know. They did a great job. And unfortunately, they postponed the reaction by the public by about 7 years, almost 8 years. Now that you got the bad news, here's the good news. Russ George is the director of Planktos.com, and I'm going to show you a minute clip from ABC News right after we look at this slide. And what he has discovered is that the seas are not so well supplied with iron-laden dust, which feeds plankton. And what's amazing is that we need to absorb millions of tons of CO2 if we want that 377 to come down, you know, in spite of all the consumer-generated waste. So let's see what Russ is doing these days. And we'll see if the volume on this is actually working.
British tycoon Richard Branson is dangling a $25 million prize before the world, asking anybody to come up with a way to reduce greenhouse gases. As ABC 7's Eric Rosales reports, at least one Bay Area company believes it's only a matter of time before the world realizes it has the answer.
With former Vice President Al Gore lending his support, British Richard Branson said he'll award $25 million to anyone who develops technology capable of removing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from the atmosphere at a rate of 1 billion tons per year.
It'll be the happiest check I've ever written if we can find somebody who can find an answer.
The announcement comes a week after the United Nations panel on climate change said global warming is more than 90% likely to have been caused by humans and predicted are likely to rise 1 to 6 degrees by the end of the century. One Bay Area company believes they've already mastered the $25 million Technology and Science Prize, Planktos Incorporated, and they've even invited Sir Richard Branson to take a voyage with them.
My phone started ringing at 6 o'clock this morning, and the email filled up, and messages said, "Go for it, Russ," from my friends around the world.
That's because Russ George's eco-restoration company, Plankton Incorporated, has been going for it for the past 5 years. This plan replenish forest-sized areas of ocean with natural iron-rich dust, just as Mother Nature used to do.
Take micronutrients back to the ocean that will restore the ocean plant life so that that plant community in the ocean will once again be taking vast amounts of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
George says iron normally reached the oceans in windborne dust storms from arid lands, but that dust supply has fallen by 30% over the last 30 years, resulting in a 10% plankton population since the late 1970s. He says we need to hire the trees and ocean plankton to do the work.
They'll easily take that billion tons and more of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere.
Next month, he's heading out to sea to demonstrate his findings, and he wants Branson and Gore to come along. In Foster City, Eric Rosales, ABC 7 News.
That's the website, Planktos.com. I encourage all of you to visit the website and purchase some carbon credits. In other words, this here could be carbon neutral if someone had estimated how much carbon is being generated and then go ahead and buy the carbon credits. These are certified credits based on the work he's doing, and lots of organizations now have taken advantage of that, and then they advertise carbon neutral event, which is a really nice ecological thing to do. But it's so satisfying that I was at a Foundation for the Future conference a few weeks ago where Russ George was also there, and luckily we talked to Branson, who was there as well, Sir Crispin Tickle. So there's a great hope that Russ is going to get this 25 million. But did you notice that it's 1 billion tons? And that's a challenge. But luckily he's using a plane now instead of just a boat. So he's able to seed even wider areas. Now the good news is we don't have to generate as much carbon dioxide if we improve the efficiency of cars or even have cars that don't emit carbon dioxide at all. Well, inventor, Andreas Manthe from Germany, and that's the website, jetcar.de, and 120 miles per gallon is what he's achieved. This is a two-seater car, and he did lots of tricks to make this happen, but the fact that they'd achieved this mileage is a great inspiration for this side of the ocean as well. And of course, my favorite, which I still have great hopes for, even though I've received criticism for promoting this product, the aircar.com. And I have, actually there's another video that shows this in action, and a Wankel-style version as well, which is being developed in Australia. But compressed air is all it uses, and it's amazingly efficient. As you can see, it's actually capable. They're predicting the capability is 200 kilometers. And right now they use a compressor, but they're building also a hybrid that will be able to compress the air on, as you go, as you travel. And the interesting thing too is you get this cold air exit out from the exhaust pipe, which is also helpful in warmer climates. And then as far as an inspirational self-sufficient community, I'm just showing you one example, and there's probably many out there. But Victoria Peters is an actress who has a website called angels-nest.org, and they've designed a community that generates their own hydrogen, powers their vehicles, and also recycles their waste. They have their two types of waste they use for two different parts of their greenhouses. And so it's interesting how you can have, in other words, almost an enclosed community without any need for outside input, especially when you deal with energy. Produce your own energy, recycle your waste, grow your own food, and harvest their water 4 times. And here's Victoria fueling her car with the hydrogen that they generate from the Darius windmill, a vertical windmill. And these are very stable, by the way, too. They can handle high speeds, and they don't take up much footprint either. And these are some of our recommendations for cleaning up our environmental act. And talking about Integrity Research Institute, you might be interested in what we're doing about it. Well, we're a nonprofit located in the Washington, D.C. area, and we do energy research and education with scientific integrity. And we also put on conferences and reports. And there's also a monthly e-news that I send out every month. I've done it for about 4 years now. And you're welcome to sign up for it. It'll be emailed to you each month. And we also have advocacy for the common good without favoritism. And we're a tax-deductible organization. So the 3 areas of interest that I've targeted are energy, propulsion, and bioenergetics. And this has been a challenge to address each one of them, but there's so much that can be done to improve each area that's really gratifying work that I'm looking forward to being full-time. And that's our website, by the way, as well, integrityresearchinstitute.org. So tonight I'd like to share with you 4 topics, 4 areas, and each one just briefly surveying to give you highlights of the areas of electromagnetic healing devices, permanent magnet motors, the quantum zero-point energy developments, and lastly, the space propulsion energies. And what in this autobiographical presentation is all of them have a UFO connection, which I found kind of interesting as I reflected upon it and thought, gee, this would be a nice presentation. Years ago, I started with a project, and I'll get to that in a minute, but just last year, I finally visited the Integratron. How many people even know the Integratron? Oh, good. I got a few people in the audience. Great. Well, it's a really interesting building. It has this very interesting ET connection that George Van Tassel was inspired by ETs to build it and build it in a certain way. And it has these coils that are pancake coils, and it was supposed to be a cylindrical coil in the center as well. That's his book, When Stars Look Down. And Giant Rock was the center of activity in which they actually had space conventions for a number of years throughout the 60s. And I even met Bob Beck, as somebody, a few of you know. Beck personally told me he went to Giant Rock during these events and actually saw a UFO there. And what I found gratifying as well is since he's passed away, both of them actually, the Integratron went through a lot of different chains of hands, but now it's in the very stable hands of 2 sisters who own it. So they have regular events there, and it's a very interesting place to go. Integratron.com is their website. So let me show you just a few pictures of that. Landers, California, right east of LA is where it's located. And it's fascinating to just drive there, and you can call up first to let her know you're coming, of course. But to not only inspect the building, to kind of understand the construction that is still unfinished, but then to actually go inside and inspect the coils. A friend of mine actually told me, before I even visited there a few years back, he says, that's like an inside Tesla coil. And so ever since then, he thought he could help them finish the design. And when I got there, I thought the same thing, because these little notches in the major column, the center column, look exactly like they should be wound as a primary. And then the secondaries would be a pancake. Or vice versa. It's debatable. You start to argue with them, and you think, well, the whole thing's wooden construction. There's my wife, by the way. And it's made with no nails whatsoever. So it's interesting that right at the center, you literally feel like you're deaf, because all your voices and noise that you make comes right back to you. It's a perfect acoustic chamber. So what he designed it, George Van Tassel designed it for, was a rejuvenation chamber. And ever since I read about this, and this is like 20 years ago, I thought, gee, these Likovsky, Townsend Brown, Nikola Tesla, which are people he mentioned in his book, probably would be interesting to look at, you know. And so as the years went by, I started to investigate each one of them in particular. And I've written books about two of them and used Likovsky's in my third book. So to me, it's very ironic that it became a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way of, I wondered how could it be a rejuvenation, and now I understand, and I'll share with you how that's possible. The answer to the question of how it could be first comes from Nikola Tesla. And since I grew up in Western New York, I became very familiar with Niagara Falls. Went there all the time, actually. And Buffalo, New York was the first city to get streetlights back in 1896. And that's when the transmission of AC electricity was first generated and first transmitted 20 miles. Well, would you believe only 2 years later, Nikola Tesla is giving a paper on how it can be used for electrotherapeutic and other purposes at the 8th annual meeting of the American Electrotherapeutic Association. So you start to see the connection already that Tesla, who was an AC expert, all of a sudden becomes a health expert overnight and becomes one of their speakers. Because what I proposed is that prior to Tesla doing this, everyone was using DC. And you can't get a Tesla coil going with DC very easily. It's difficult, you have to convert it and so forth. But once these guys could start plugging them into the wall, and I'm talking doctors because here's a quote from a doctor. 1932, Dr. Kolcher points out that Tesla's currents were highly beneficial with cancer and other diseases as well. So this was very intriguing to me, and of course I had to understand a lot more about it, and that's what the bioelectromagnetics portion of the work I've done answered. But in the meantime, Tesla also tried to divert into the wireless transmission of electricity. You know, why use wires if you can use something wireless? And to this day, no one believes this is possible. I know the handful of people that do, and they're in my book, Harnessing the Wheel. But that's literally how few the minority is that understand this principle, understand how to resonate with the Earth ionosphere cavity, and how to efficiently transmit with a pulsed longitudinal wave. So you can literally get power level transmissions of electricity worldwide without hardly any diminishing loss. Tesla measured 95% transmissivity consistently whenever he tested it.
How's that compared to our electric grid, Tom?
Don't get me started. Question was, how does it compare with our electrical grid? Well, I used to have a nasty slide that I would show to answer the electrical grid, and it's literally 2/3 that you lose. We are currently losing 66% of all the electricity we generate when it finally gets to your house. You only get less than 33% of what's gone in at the And there's lots of reasons for that, but I'm trying to give you the highlights here. But thanks to Joel for provoking that question, because there's a vast difference, and that's what's so amazing about it. Okay, well, let me go back to the rejuvenation chamber. First of all, Tesla's giving us a clue here. He says tissues are condensers. Condensers are the old word for capacitors. Capacitors are parallel plates that store charge. Now, how could your body be something like a parallel plate? Well, I found how, and that is each cell membrane actually has an insulator and it has charge on either side. And it's capable of storing 10 million volts per meter. But what Tesla points out is that several million volts can be applied to the human body, and he proposed they were very valuable to the electrotherapy 100 years ago. And there were lots of machines that were developed at that time to do this. This one actually has the secondary coil outside, and then of course it's sparking out in midair, which would be very noisy as well. But it also has these different gas tubes that are on either side here. So I was intrigued by this particular one. There's a whole bunch of them that, there's a Jeff Bahari website you can go to. It's the electrotherapymuseum.com, I believe is the website. And you'll see tons of these machines. And he's a collector. He loves to collect them and then give slideshows on them. But the important thing, all of these were used for therapy. And you find the gas tubes attached to the high voltage and applied to the body. And so, overcoming my fear of high voltage, which everyone sort of innately has, you eventually start to find that it has beneficial effects. And then you start to like it, because you see and you feel the depth that electrons can penetrate into your body. It's a fascinating phenomenon. There's Dr. Giroux. He's an 80-year-old retired chiropractor, one of my early models, and he's using it on his shoulder bursitis. And there's my wife testing a more advanced model. I was contracted to put a Tesla coil in a box. And it took me a whole year to do it, because high voltage wants to come out. It doesn't want to stay in the box. But those are a couple of the projects that we did for a while. And so the book that I wrote to summarize all this, and I've given to several different conferences, including the Whole Person Healing Conference, is the Bioelectromagnetic Healing book. And suffice it to say that the TMP is the secret to this charge storage in your cells, transmembrane potential. And what's fascinating is the 10 million volts per meter is the gradient across every cell membrane. So your body loves high voltage, and nobody knows it, you know. So the nice thing is that it strengthens your immune system. And of course, electrons are every antioxidant's active ingredient. And it's mainly because they are the real antioxidants. The references show that oxidative damage causes aging. So it's a good idea to attack free radicals if you can, because free radicals steal electrons, causing more free radical damage. One of the organic textbooks I went to, which I used in college, said if you take a shower using chlorinated water and you don't have a shower filter, the chlorine, CO2, disassociates at body temperature. So you're breathing in free radicals, you're getting it in your pores of your skin, and every Cl plus replicates 10,000 times. That's where I got the 10,000 times from. So to me, it was just, you know, inexcusable that this information's not out there. And of course, the damaging DNA and antioxidants are very important, but we take the pill form of antioxidants. So one of my great aspirations is to be able to provide an electrical source of that in terms of electrical clothing. Now, 3 miles from the Integratron is a giant rock, and that's the link to our second project, the permanent magnet motors. And this is really where I did get started in the early field that was back in around 1980, literally in 1980, when I purchased this book called Sunburst: Return of the Ancients. And the book was filled with lots of unusual stories of UFOs, the author's personal experience. Norman Paulson just passed away a few months ago, by the way. And of course, the UFO pictures, there's giant rock right in the middle here, and the UFO was above it in daylight, no less. And the book was filled with lots of drawings like this. This is actually from the book. And the description, which to me was the most important, was what are these magnets around the rotating disk that's the width of the UFO. And of course, the intriguing part was the generator could be self-perpetuating. So I was all ears, and I decided to go visit the community, the Sunburst community. And it took me 3 days before they let me see their generator, and then this became the part of my master's project back at the university, because I was so excited about it, I had to build one too, you know. So that's what the homopolar handbook's all about. But I thought I'd also show you the more enlarged version of these two photos, because what could be better than not only seeing a photo of a UFO, but the person who took it? And in this case, usually uniformed people are high credibility. And notice, of course, I might as well at least point out, the descending field that's below it. This has great scientific significance as far as what force is levitating that craft. So here's the quote, and it beats me why it never appeared in any of the further editions of the book, but the 1980 version called Sunburst, which you still can get on Amazon as a used copy, has this exact quote in there. At the outside of the perimeter of the disk carrying 12 magnets, they could draw for perpetual flow of electricity. And of course it depended upon the maintaining of the rotation. But to me the most interesting part too was the fact that if you had two of these going in opposite directions, it would create its own gravity as well. So we've got this combination of electrical energy and gravity in one basic device. So for years I kept saying, well, what could possibly work like that on this Earth that we know about? Well, in 1980 when I went to Germany to talk about the project that I had started on the homopolar generator, I was also fortunate enough to meet John Searle in Hanover, Germany. And it turns out his invention is probably the closest I've found to the same type of process they're talking about. And ironically, and this I just added this title, this subtitle here a couple days ago, I counted the number of magnets around here and said, wow, the Russians who are now rebuilding this Searle device actually have the 12 magnets there. So to me, this perhaps could be the embodiment of something better than a simple single homopolar generator. And those of you who knew Bruce De Palma and Adam Tremblay and the people that contributed to the homopolar handbook, Tim Wilhelm, all of them were working on a single homopolar. But now, if we put a bunch of them, this is a cross-section, a bunch here and a bunch over here, you end up with a device that has a nonlinear, higher level function. So much so that it draws from the environment. This is the anecdotal reports from the Russians who tested this. And when we compared the heat being absorbed and the electricity output, it had the order of magnitude comparison. So I ended up not only finding them an investor, but bringing them, the investor and I brought them to the Department of Energy. We found a Russian translator for them, and I also drafted the patent. So we helped them get some patent protection. And the company is called Energy and Propulsion Systems, LLC. And they're still accepting investors. But this is the group of us at the Department of Energy. There's the investor. There's the two Russians, Roshin and Godin. And there I'm in the background. And these two guys at the DOE were excellent and great hosts. I happen to know David Hamilton from years before at my conference in '99, and they spent the whole day with the Russians literally interrogating them. I mean, we were for anything that would contradict what they were saying. And these guys were really truthful and never once came up with anything that was suspicious. So they've had funding now for about 6 years, and this is the only slide I'm allowed to show you of their progress that they've made. And the recent reports is that we're very hopeful this year we'll have an output of energy that'll actually be something we can report. So I'm happy to see kind of the complete circle of finding a great inventor, finding an interesting investor, getting the two together, and then seeing them go happy into the sunset. And of course we want the product to work, but the trick is to get them to work together as a marriage made in heaven before the product can find its way out to the public. Now, one project that is less costly, easier to build, and actually is in Make magazine out at the booth I have, spiral motor. And for our Japanese guests, I'm happy to give the Japanese information, the credits here to the Japanese company called Kyoto Company, because this was reported in 1979 in Popular Science as a Japanese invention. And when you get all these patents, which I have, it's about a dozen Japanese patents, every one of them include the electromagnet in it. So you've got, and this may be hard to understand, and it sat in my files for years before I found somebody building it. And then I thought, gee, I might as well go back and study it and see what the guy's building. And of course, the Japanese knew what they were doing, because as you have repelling, these are repelling magnets, the repulsion's very high here, and it tends to go down as this rotor would rotate around. So you get 80% of that cycle for free. I mean, this is a great embodiment of free energy. And the trick is to replace this portion, which is the regaging portion, to help start the cycle again. But I have lots of ideas for it, and luckily, once again, I found a retired professor, Dr. Ted Loader, who's now working on it. And he wanted a project, so I gave it to him, and now I've given him plenty of suggestions about how to replace the electromagnet. So we're hopeful we're also going to show a self-running permanent magnet-generated motor without outside input. And that'll be great, because I feel our destiny requires it. You know, we can't get off the planet if we're just burning stuff. I mean, when you think about it, the more you meditate on it, burning old dead fossils is only got to produce more dead, morbid stuff. It's not life-giving at all. So anyways, that's the mystical portion of my lecture. But the scientific part is what I'm trying to share with you, and I like digesting it and giving the simplistic version of it, because, for example, Hartman patent 4215330, you can go home and build yourself. You can buy little magnets, which I've done. You can get your ball bearing, and it will go up a slight incline, all by itself, with no input. So you start to understand that nonlinear magnets can do something. Inhomogeneous magnetic fields that get stronger at one end and weaker down here. That's what this shows, just the opposite. Weak magnetic field, and then stronger and stronger, it goes near the end. And notice the weird concoction he has of magnets cause it to literally jump off the edge. And that's exactly what this achieves, a disengaging of the rotor completely from the stator. So this to me was very inspiring. I studied it a lot. I found that the physics textbooks already had all the equations I needed, because it's very familiar in the Stern-Gerlach experiment. So, and then of course I went on to other crazy things that include the Brady motor. Unfortunately, you come across a lot of flakes in this business. Perendov's unfortunate company, perendovpower.com, which gives you a lot of hype, and then, which I did actually build the thing, and I tested this is my construction of the simulation, cost about $1,000 to build it. As best as I could match exactly what I learned how to do it, it was unsuccessful. And you find the deception oftentimes is like ego-driven, because they put so much energy into the product, the inventor becomes obsessed with what's going to work. So you kind of have to be very selective in looking at the fringe of energy and propulsion. So the third topic, which now is my latest endeavor, and I just finished a book on it called Zero Point Energy, Fuel the Future, really entails probably the most important fundamental source of energy in the universe. And it truly is. The more you investigate this field of zero-point energy, the more, like, I just stood back in awe as far as the numbers, the integration. Zero-point energy penetrates every part of your body. Literally, without zero-point energy, all your atoms would just fall to the floor in a pile. It's keeping every electron away from the nucleus when we know positive and negative charges attract, but quantum theory never explained it. But zero-point energy does. And in fact, the papers now are tremendously increasing. The number of published papers on zero-point energy is increasing exponentially. So can we use this stuff? Can the quantum vacuum do anything? Well, NASA certainly says so. And of course, they're proposing this astronomical energy density. I mean, you can pick your power of 10, and that's what they're showing. It's a range of estimates, depending on which expert you look at. But the important thing is that there's lots of ways that I've discovered in the literature to transmit, transduce, and convert what amounts to non-thermal noise. When you take away all the heat, when you take away all the temperature, you've still got non-thermal noise, this little jittering activity in the universe. And what's interesting is it's a field effect. When people talk, like Angelica did yesterday, about quantum entanglement, it's literally the field, the zero-point field, that's communicating through. So one of the signs that we've seen is zero-bias diodes. They already are operating for microwave detectors, and so the hope is that these can be applied, just as some of the similar patents have already shown, in even molecular devices now show, the rectification on a very small nanoscale. And of course, as the metal-to-metal diodes in this top patent shows, you can actually assemble them in a big array, and it might be big, but it's numbers, but the size of it might be a meter cubed. Oh, and after I was talking about this to somebody at the desk earlier today, we were talking about the 2050 project. Has anyone heard about the 2050 project? No? Well, briefly, what it is a professor decided to interview 4,000 people. And you've heard of remote viewing, right? Well, what he did is he interviewed them with the question, what do you see happening in 2050? And he had the same questions for all of them, about 10 questions. And the project was to analyze and assemble and statistically show what these people agreed about. And lots of them were social things and so forth. But one of the questions was, what about the energy situation in 2050? And would you believe about 90% of the respondents all said, and this is from their unconscious, this is from somewhere inside their brain, inside our soul, they're saying, oh, energy is not a problem. We all have units in our homes and in our cars and in our planes that power itself. I mean, I just felt a sigh of relief after hearing that. I mean, when you see the collective unconscious expressing itself in such a majority rule, and this is majority ruling, you know, in a non-provoked way, hey, you know, we might find it to be true, and of course, I think it's our destiny. Devices like this being produced by top quality physicists. I mean, this guy quit his job at the Jet Propulsion Lab and ended up working for his own company, which is called Interstellar Technologies. Isn't that a great name? and he got away with it. I mean, he's got investors, he's supported, he's publishing journal articles, and he's got patents like this. PhysRev is where he published this thing. And what's fascinating is this little tiny nano device, it's microns in size, so it's a MEMS device actually, produces a half a nanowatt. But the fact is, it's so small, you can have 1 million of these in 1 meter. That's what microns are about. It's a millionth of a meter. So if you go to that kind of size, and of course you can stack them vertically too, that's exactly what we're talking about. You can get into the kilowatt range, which is exactly what he estimates. So the trick with many of these things is to work on the fabrication of them. And of course, if you want to learn more, I suggest the book. And this has made news in New York Times, for example, when physicists confirmed the power of the force of the quantum vacuum. And so the last topic, which I propose is perhaps the most exciting for you guys, is what can we do about propulsion? Well, in Science magazine, this became the breakthrough of the year when they found out the universe was accelerating, not only moving each other, but actually accelerating. And the physicist Fiegel published in 2004 the ability for the quantum vacuum to create momentum, just with the appropriately aligned electric and magnetic fields. So what was interesting is he also used the zero-point field in his energy conservation parts of it. And that's what I found very intriguing too. Some physicists say you have to conserve energy. The others say, nope, it's so big, open system, you're going to get infinite energy from the zero-point field. So either way, it doesn't matter. The energy's there, it's ready to be used. So now I have a little, it's a movie, but it's in a series of slides. And this was done by Dr. David Fronig. And I recently met up with him in Utah at a National Space Society meeting. And his work extracting zero-point energy for power is based on simple calculations, fluid dynamics, approach to the vacuum. And you can see for yourself the simulations that come from that. First of all, of course, I have to give you a couple little equations. Speed of light and speed of sound. But the interesting thing is that viscous drag is compared to the Einstein-Huff drag of the vacuum. So the comparison is very well established. It's standard physics. And what he proposes is you can use a torque to actually reduce the drag in space. And of course, some of us might want to travel faster than the speed of light, right? One or two of us maybe someday? No? Physicists say, oh, absolutely not. I mean, I get great, horrible reactions from physicists, you know. You're violating laws. Well, this is also physics too, but they're, you know, relatively, what do I say, relatively biased, because Einstein got to them first. Okay, well, here's the graphs that everyone can understand. The speed of sound goes up as you approach the speed of sound. And keep in mind that's what this capital M means, the velocity that you're going at over the speed limit. In this case, for years, the speed limit was the speed of sound. Until Chuck Yeager burst through that sound barrier, nobody thought you could ever do it. And the same thing is true today with the speed of light. It's a barrier that everyone believes is impenetrable. But notice any similarities between the equations here? That's the first clue. And the second one is when you change the equations around to look at the actual drag factors, they also have remarkable similarities. And when you simulate them, they also have the same kind of compression in front of the ship and extension in back of it. So the similarities keep going. You get more and more intrigued by the comparisons. And what he proposes is also that a toroidal-shaped circular craft has a strong rationality to it. Everyone notice? Did anyone notice the UFOs tend to be circular? There's a good reason for it. Now we're finally discovering why. And of course, David's also a very good UFO person. And I was happy to learn that after I met him, because of course you don't necessarily talk about it at some of these scientific meetings. But his website is quantumfields.com. And the highlights of his invention and his discovery is that you can actually transfer energy from the vacuum to the vehicle, which is exactly what we're proposing back when we told you a little bit about the Searle device, the MEC, the magnetic energy converter. It seems to be capable of that as well. And you see that with zero-point fields. Now, the other fascinating part of it, his finding is that the cooler you get, the more the drag. Anyone know the temperature of outer space? It's about 3 degrees above absolute zero. So you're in a perfect environment for this effect to have an optimum result. And so here we go into the slideshow. What we're looking at as a sample is 0.99 of the speed of light. But he's describing and showing you the first slide is just a comparison between thermal pressures from air at Mach 0.99 and then the vacuum pressures at 0.99 of C, speed of light. And of course, you can see the colorations show the density of the pressures and the similarities, of course. And in all of the cases, the motion of the vehicle is to the left. So the important part, too, in comparing each of them is that the thermal atmospheric pressures tend to be negative. In other words, they're pushing toward the wing or toward the vehicle itself and retarding in the vehicle's direction toward the left. But when you look at the vacuum pressures, they're the opposite. They're outward, and it's an impulsion force. Isn't that amazing? The vacuum wants to help you move faster. I mean, this is exactly what you'd want, especially if you got to go pretty fast to get anywhere. So the space warping in vacuum polarizing ship is a thin repulsive field interaction region, and it's right around the skin. This is the interesting part. Just right around the skin is where all the activity takes place between the vacuum and the field effect itself. And so the speed here is 0.3 C. And as we go further, we're up to 0.4 C. And notice how things start changing. Right now, it still looks pretty symmetrical. But as we approach the higher speed, you start to see the asymmetry take place. We're up to 0.7, almost 0.8 C, and now you're starting to see the pressure is increasing. And it's still, of course, moving to the left, but now we're getting this tail effect at 0.9 C, which is very pronounced. And as we get up to the fabulous breakthrough of the speed of light, that's where you start to get tremendous pressures in the front of the vehicle as well. But the interesting thing is not much changes in the simulation as you pass the speed of light. I mean, notice the differences as we compare the two. It still looks like the pressures are about the same. But of course, the higher the speed, the higher the pressures. And now we get another shock wave that starts to get closer and closer to the ship as we're going to 1.4 C and higher. And they're up to 2 times the speed of light. And each time the shock wave is becoming more and more horizontal as the ratio is higher and higher, 5 times the speed of light. And the rest is pretty much the same because the simulation now is becoming sort of reaching its limit. And we're up to 0.10 times. Yep, that's the last 10 times the speed of light. So the computations are based on the space between the thermal and the 0 point. And the governing wave equations are disturbances in the propagation of air in vacuum of space and the resistance increase. So these are very acceptable engineering ways to analyze something. It's a systems approach to the problem. And the streamlines, of course, are part of the computer simulation. And warped space-time is a relativistic effect. Now, the interesting conclusion you get from this type of simulation is that if you're at a small fraction of the speed of light, in other words, subluminal, you tend to get about 1 g acceleration, and the travel through a solar system would be, say, in days instead of years. But the inertialess flight at enormous acceleration, where you're at the speed of light, there you can start to get into the cosmos, in other words, travel beyond the solar system. And once again, he's mentioning the inertialess flight at enormous acceleration, far beyond the speed of light. And there, of course, we can get to the nearby stars. Now, what are we talking about when we say inertialess field? Well, you won't believe it, but this is probably the most important project that has been compartmentalized by our black projects and Area 51 and whatever you want to call it. Classified projects exist in all the aerospace industries as well as in the government. It's called the billion-dollar secret. Several $1 billion is shaved off of the defense budget every year, and it's unaccounted for. Nick Cook is a friend of mine. He's a journalist from England, and he did a 2-hour special on that exact topic. Well, one of these inventions, called inertial shielding, is something so valuable and so important that I decided to make a slide of it, and I've even talked to a deputy director of the National Reconnaissance Office about this when I at the National Space Society. And for those of you who are not familiar with Newton's law, Newton's second law, F equals ma, the important point I want to share with you is that this law is based only on inertial mass. It has nothing to do with your weight that you feel right now attracting to the floor. It's only manifested when you go around a curve and your body wants to go straight and you're trying to turn the car or something. Or if you're in a spacecraft or an aircraft and you start to feel forces. Well, they're not due to gravity, it's due to your inertia. But what is inertia? That's the amazing thing. Inertia literally is the connection to the 0 point field. And this has been proven by the famous physicists now that even books now have been written proclaiming this as a big breakthrough. The important thing is that if it's possible, say just a leap of imagination that you really could design a shield to interfere with this interaction. Einstein call the Mach's principle an interaction with the distant stars. That's the only way he could explain inertia. Because if you think about it, if you're out in space, how do you know if you're turning? There's no reference frame. And so they could only guesstimate that the far distant stars would be your reference frame. So that's how shaky the concept of inertia is in physics today. But the important conclusion you get, and this is the most exciting part that I have to share, is that if you can lower m, you automatically will raise your acceleration for the exact same force, keeping the force constant. Whatever your force is that you're shooting out the back or using to propel the vehicle, if you can lower m, you're going to get a tremendous acceleration. And are there any UFO stories talking about tremendous accelerations? Nah, right angle turns and so forth. See, we all sort of hear these stories, but you think, no, it's impossible. And I've seen people at audiences where I use this, and they'll immediately dismiss it, you know, thinking, oh, it's physics violating, you know, stuff. Well, hey, the physics has been evolving, and this is what I have to share, is that as physics evolves, it's good to keep up with the latest journal articles, because this is the most powerful journal article that I found on the topic. And there is the equation, Lorentz force, V cross B. And it's, of course, embedded in this inertial type of stochastic dynamics that they use. It's a more advanced quantum mechanics field. But Puthoff, Ruda, and Heish are famous now for proposing this and proving it's possible. And then, of course, I've already talked to Al Puthoff about it and Heish about it. Why don't we discuss the possibility of shielding, of interrupting this relationship that we have with the zero-point field? And I'm happy to share this photograph, since I know the person who took it, and he explained to me exactly what this photograph means. This was taken with a 35mm camera off the outside the Stewart Air Force Base in Pine Bush. And Bruce Cornett has a lot of these, and he had a team that would go out there in the middle of the night and take these photographs. And this is a triangular craft. Triangular crafts are so well known that the Discovery Institute produced a whole report on all the different sightings, all the characteristics. They're probably the most closest to being declassified of any classified black project. But the interesting thing very few people know is that they exhibit this right angle turn. And the story goes, this was actually taken looking above, and so you see this line going downward, but it actually was going away from the viewer, or from the camera. And he opened the shutter. It was just an open shutter right at this point. And notice the blinking red and green lights on either side. Notice how they try to make it look conventional, but it's making a right angle turn. He said, oops, that's not conventional at all. And no visible contrail and so forth, and inverse Doppler effect, very fascinating. But the right angle turn is what is probably the most provocative. So the inertial shielding is something that could be declassified for civilian use, and then heck, we'd be out there in the solar system with no problem and visiting Mars tomorrow. Some of these books that I recommend, Hunt for Zero Point, there's my friend Nick Cook, published this one, and John Thomas is also a friend, and I got it probably the first time in public at our September conference. I highly recommend his DVD, which we have for sale as well. And if any of you are interested, I wanted to include this slide because we have our dear friend Bob Wood with us, who helped bring this book to publication. Without his help, this book would never have become off to press. And it was written by a former NASA scientist who really took great pains to calculate inertia-free turns and the propulsion that was responsible, and whether or not you could have these 10G type of saucer making reversals and explain it through physical laws. And it's interesting that it really was very explainable. So it's amazing the type of physics that can be applied to UFO propulsion if you put your mind to it. And one of many of the documents, and there are people in this room that are much better at producing government documents, but this was shared actually from Stephen Greer collection, and I think it's may or may not be in the disclosure book. But this was a CIA document released in '94, and it actually had a little bit of detail. The event took place in 1952, and it's one of many types of UFO stories that tell me the technology involved. And I feel that's probably the most valuable to us humans that are scientists, because we'd like to build something like it too. And so you can read some of the details and so forth. This is just an excerpt. It was a circular craft as well, but it was sort of small. And this was the actual drawing that was included. And it had a rotating rim. These are the rim parts that were rotating. So it became a very interesting study as far as that is concerned. Now, when you look at different craft that actually have a long history of different sightings, and probably some of you are familiar with the Adamski and Andreasen and Lazar UFOs, we also see some similarities to what Searle and Brown have done. T. Townsend Brown was the one who started NICAP years ago, and then became involved in patenting circular craft with high voltage attached. And this is a drawing, or actually a photograph, of one of the Searle craft. Now, the two of them actually behave in very similar fashions. The high voltage actually tends to propel it toward the positive, and that's probably the most interesting part of it. And so when you analyze some of these things, I give credit to Paul Potter for sharing these slides that I'm going to give you now, because he produced them from the Andreasen Phase 1 and 2 books. And they're intriguing in the way that it challenges the, even if you have a good physics and science background, to understand how much interaction is happening here from applied physics, dielectrophoresis type of liquids, to quartz crystals, and of course to rotating electric fields. But this is the kind of work that needs to be done. That's really why I'm showing this to you, because here's a lone inventor, lone graphics artist, who decides to take it himself to try to render the details that he read in a UFO book, and then lend credibility to the science behind it. And to me, this is probably very important, because physicists could spend years analyzing this now that he's done this kind of work. There's actually a couple different patents and different craft that have these characteristics as well. So it's not so to the Andreasen affair. And luckily, he also includes a proposed circuit diagram as well, which is very interesting. And the dielectrics and the crystals also are part of the accumulation of electric charge. So when you get into the high voltage field, as I have, I find this very intriguing, because it's amazing how well dielectrics can store charge and how fluids can transfer charge. So a lot of this does have credence, and there's lots more slides associated with this as well. But moving to the last few of them, I wanted to show you one that deals with electrogravitics, since that's a topic of another investigation of mine. If you look at the bottom of these particular photos, the three conductors that you're looking at the bottom of this daylight photo, when it's taken in this type of infrared type of photo, shows that only a couple of them are active. And the important part about this is that when only a couple of them are active, this is really showing the directionality of the craft. These are intricately involved in the propulsion system. And this is exactly what we see in electrogravitics as well. Once again, when you look at something like Bob Lazar's work, the gravity generators that he uses also have directionality to them as well. And I've talked to Bob Lazar about this. The element 115 is probably controversial. The whole conversion process is still debatable. But when you hear his story, you really wonder how he was able to get this much information out. And so anyone who's done this deserves a lot of credit, even if the information isn't fully explained to us in a way that we can understand it. Because obviously, with advanced propulsion, and that's the way the story goes. Everything about this craft was small. He could barely fit into the seats that are there. And they also had, I should point out one electrical phenomena here, and that is all the forms inside the craft were smoothed, and presumably for charge retention. So I published an article in Last Rising describing the connection between the Searle and the Townsend Brown work. And then I found over in the UFO magazine back in '97 a similar type of work somebody else had done, analyzing patents that also related to propulsion systems. And so this is really I think, a very seminal type of research that helps the public to become more familiar with what we can learn from these sightings, besides the convincing of the public that they're real. I think the one step further is technology. And these are the two different types at the bottom. And the Townsend Brown patents, there's plenty of them. I've given presentations just in this topic alone, are very complex saucer-shaped designs. And yet they have the ability to hover. And this, to me, was very intriguing, whether this was even possible. Well, when I wrote the first book, and I have to give credit to Paul Violette for giving me not only these drawings, but also his analysis of the B-2 bomber, that could be what he called electrogravitic. Now, since then, I've come to the conclusion that it's probably just an ion propulsion effect dealing with the charging of the leading edge of a capacitor. If you deal with static charge, you're not going to get a whole lot of high propulsion. However, when we looked at some of the static voltages that Townsend Brown was using in terms of thousands of volts, you find the interesting relationship with speed. The disk speed and voltage are related in a exponential fashion. And of course, I have to point out that the Office of Naval Research did some tests. That's where Brown worked. And also the Army Research Lab just recently did some repeated work. And I was able to get the Army Research Lab authors to contribute to my new book, Electrovitics 2. And the forces we're talking about are about 1 pound per kilowatt. So, hey, that's not bad, especially if you're not burning anything. Now, the intriguing portion of some of the Townsend Brown early work, when he talked about controlling gravitation, I found the most difficult to understand. And for years, I just simply dismissed it. Does anyone read these numbers on that barbell? 44 pounds each. How could anybody with 120,000 volts move a 44-pound or 88 pounds in any significant fashion? Well, the answer comes from the similar work that NASA did when they patented this as well. If you use static voltage, you'll get a small effect. If you use pulsed high voltage, you get a much bigger effect. And to me, it was still mysterious, and I had the experience of working with Zinsser briefly, and so I accumulated all the work that he had done with 2 parallel electrodes in a dielectric, which was water at the time. But he also had a long-lasting effect from pulsed electrics. And then I found the answer, and it was in Jeff Amenko's book. Retired professor from the University of West Virginia just somehow out of the blue decided to call it an electrokinetic equation. And that's the title of Townsend Brown's early patent. And what's, to me, the most important part is that the current change per time is a derivative. In other words, if you accelerate, you're changing your velocity. Well, if you accelerate your current, you're also changing your current in time. Very similar fashion. The faster you change your current, the more force you get. And that's exactly what he predicted. And then all of a sudden I applied it to all these different things I just told you about, and each one of them predicted the direction that the craft would move. The capacitor or the parallel plates, whatever. But all of this wasn't really known back in 1955 when they were investigating gravity and was on the cover page of the Chicago Herald Tribune. But to me, I thought it was pretty cool that they even showed a circular spacecraft on the cover of the Herald Tribune. So it shows you how open 50 years ago the press was to this topic and how things have become a lot more suppressed years later. And one of the last things I want to do is the drawing that you're seeing in front of you right now. This was a very difficult fight for me to get because the artist, Mark McCandlish, was getting attacked by another group of guys who felt that this was the biggest secret that they wanted to keep secret. And so I kept getting phone calls and emails, don't publish this, this is too, I'm going to be in trouble, I'm going to, whatever the threats he thought he too. But I persisted because I felt this has already been disclosed at Stephen Greer's 2001 disclosure in Washington, D.C., and that's where I met Mark. And what's amazing about this craft, it has 1950 rivets on it. And it was demonstrated at Norton Air Force Base in 1988. So this whole thing is explainable with the electrokinetic equation. You literally have your high voltage each capacitor plate, and he explained to me that it operates in a three fashion. In other words, 3 plates, just like the Grangemouth craft we looked at the bottom. There's 3 electrodes that are activated at any one time, and there's a distributor cap, like the old style automobiles, distributor cap in the center that distributes the spark to the capacitors in an equidistant fashion. So at any one moment, there's a capacitor bank that's being fired, and the force downward. And you can analyze the direction of the current, and you end up with the prediction that you will have a continual force downward. Now, the anecdotal information that the congressman came up with, the staffers came up with, and it was also investigated by Hal Puthoff, who's very cagey about his endorsement. He attacked me in an email when I said it was endorsed, and I still now use the word investigated. But he confirmed 2 independent eyewitnesses agreed on every detail that they told him about. That's significant, for sure. And the anecdote is that 3 of these were hovering inside an aircraft hangar in the middle of the summer when it should have been very hot, behind a hangar, behind a curtain, and it was cold in the environment where they were hovering. And they were just putting on display. It was part of an air show. But they invited certain guests, including a congressman, to come and visit and see this old relic of an aircraft that who knows what they're doing with it nowadays. But to me, the fact that it hovers and the fact that it's explainable means civilians should be using it too. So for the aircraft of the future, John Thomas has shared this vision, which his son has drawn. His website is surrealeffect.com. He envisions that we're eventually going to see circular craft alongside the standard airlines. And they'll have special destinies, special flights that will be more suitable to their abilities to fly. And so we might see eventually what Aviation Week and Space Technology predicts, and that zero-point energy will emerge from the realm of science fiction and may be the key to deep space travel. Thank you very much for your attention. Glad I kept you awake, I hope. Do we have any time for questions? Or do you think you're... Yeah? If you want to, I'm open to them if there's anybody that is... Okay. I could...
Check.
No? Yes? No? Maybe? Questions? Questions? If you're also interested, you can take home a souvenir, and that is the Future Energy magazine. I put another pile out front as soon as you exit, and it has articles in it, very interesting one about generating electricity from trees, and of course our catalog as well. So, okay, thanks a lot again. Welcome.